everyone! Snow White has reportedly reached the $200 million global milestone, and while that might sound impressive at first glance, it's actually a major disappointment when we examine Rachel Zegler's current situation and potential career path. The reported numbers vary a little. Some sources place it around $197 million, while Box Office Mojo lists it at $21 million. To be generous, let's go with the higher figure. Still, when compared to its massive budget, that result is poor. The production budget has been widely estimated between $260 and $269 million. But that doesn't account for the costly reshoots, which likely pushed the real number closer to $300 million or more. Even with tax incentives bringing the net down slightly, the investment was staggering, especially for a film led by a relatively unknown actress. Rachel Zegler's biggest role prior to this was West Side Story, and Hollywood seems determined to make her a star whether audiences are on board or not. Supporters might point to the film's 72% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, but that figure is based on a small sample size and the platform's updated rating system, which many argue inflates the numbers. The real story is told by audience comments and critical reviews, a dismal 37% critical score, with some noting how the original Snow White remains a flawless classic. If you're going to remake such an iconic film, you need to honor it, not completely reinvent it. Interestingly, the failure isn't entirely on Zegler. The film is bad despite her, not because of her. The script is deeply flawed, with writing that even the best actress couldn't have redeemed. Financially, the situation is dire. After theaters take their cut, Disney walks away with about $100 million on a movie that cost roughly $300 million to make, plus what was likely another $100 million in marketing expenses. That puts the loss near $200 million, an astonishing deficit for a single film. This brings us to Rachel Zegler's present circumstances. She's currently starring as Eva Peron in the London Palladium's production of Evita, a prestigious role in a historic venue. The marketing promotes her as a Golden Globe winner and highlights her appearances in The Hunger Games, Disney's Snow White, and West Side Story. On paper, it's a big opportunity. But here's where things get troubling. As of now, nearly every seat for the June shows is still available. For a supposedly high-profile production, that level of unfilled demand raises serious questions about her drawing power and what it means for her future in the industry. On the ticketing website for Evita, a traffic light system shows seat availability, and everything is green, wide open and unsold. Practically no one is buying tickets. For someone touted as Hollywood's next big thing, that's a troubling sign. It suggests Rachel Zegler doesn't have the drawing power that studios seem convinced she possesses. When I compared it with other productions running at the same time, the difference was striking. A John Lithgow play, for example, had far fewer tickets left. That's what true box office pull looks like, when audiences show up because of the performer. The Zegler situation highlights Hollywood's disconnect from actual viewer tastes. Despite repeated evidence that audiences aren't interested, studios keep pushing her forward, almost like executives running into a brick wall hoping it will magically turn into a door. To be fair, she wasn't solely responsible for West Side Story's lackluster performance. Spielberg's remake debuted during the pandemic, when theater attendance was still recovering and musicals had already been underperforming for years. But even so, Disney gambled hundreds of millions of dollars by casting her as Snow White, one of their most iconic roles, without solid proof she could carry a film. What's remarkable is how the studio system continues to elevate certain actors regardless of financial results. Hollywood has created an echo chamber where insiders convince each other that someone is destined for stardom, even when audiences don't agree. It's reminiscent of how studios kept pushing actors like Shailene Woodley or Sam Worthington into blockbuster roles despite lukewarm public reception. Snow White's box office paints the picture clearly: a loss of more than $200 million. Historically, a flop of that magnitude would have derailed a young actor's career. Yet Hollywood today seems determined to stand by its casting choices, regardless of commercial outcomes. Compounding the problem were Zegler's pre-release remarks about the original Snow White. In multiple interviews, she dismissed the 1937 classic as outdated, referred to the prince as stalkerish, and implied the remake would fix the story. These comments triggered a PR nightmare, alienating the very fans Disney needed to bring in. When actors publicly disparage the source material they're adapting, it rarely ends well, because it signals to audiences that they don't respect what made the original beloved in the first place. Contrast that with how stars of successful reboots usually frame things. They emphasize what's new while still expressing reverence for the original. The Evita case is particularly telling because theater is generally more meritocratic than Hollywood. Stage audiences are discerning and willing to spend big money only on performers they believe are worth it. When a major show at the London Palladium fails to move tickets, it speaks volumes. Yes, stage acting requires different skills, but genuine star power usually transcends mediums. Hugh Jackman, for example, moves effortlessly between film and theater because audiences trust his talent and presence. Meanwhile, the entertainment media continues to present Zegler as a rising success story. Her Golden Globe win for West Side Story is constantly highlighted, as if that one award outweighs a string of commercial disappointments. It feels like the narrative is being built in real time, regardless of reality. The lingering question is how many box office failures a young star can survive before studios stop pouring hundreds of millions into making them happen. Normally, a string of failures would be enough to sideline most young performers, but today's Hollywood ecosystem seems determined to continue this experiment with Rachel Zegler despite all the warning signs. What makes the situation unusual is that audiences don't appear to actively dislike her as an actress. As I've said before, the problems with Snow White lie mainly in its poor writing and misguided creative choices, not her performance. She's clearly talented and technically capable. The real issue is that studios have pushed her into massive, high-stakes projects without giving her the chance to build a fan base or prove her box office draw. In the current entertainment landscape, audiences have endless options and rarely rally behind someone simply because the industry insists they should. Manufactured stardom seldom works. Real star power comes from strong performances, smart project choices, and authentic connections with viewers. Look at young actors who have gained genuine momentum. Florence Pugh, Timothée Chalamet, or Zendaya. They rose gradually, balancing smaller, critical hits with smart mainstream roles, allowing their audiences to grow organically. By contrast, Zegler was thrust into $300 million tentpoles before she'd had the opportunity to establish herself.
Wanting to show appreciation for the opportunity so few people get, she turns around and wags her finger at them through
That's why her current trajectory raises serious concerns. Under traditional Hollywood logic, a string of financial failures at the box office and a stage performance that can't sell tickets would call for a career cooldown. Yet, despite all this, the industry's commitment to her hasn't wavered. She next appeared as Lucy Greybeard in The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. The film earned around $330 million worldwide against a budget of roughly $100 million, but that success belonged to the franchise itself, not Zegler. She wasn't the draw. The Hunger Games brand carried the weight. If I were a studio executive, I'd hesitate to place her at the center of another costly tentpole based on those numbers alone. The financial risk simply isn't justified. It feels like a gambler doubling down after a string of losses, hoping the next bet will finally pay off. Disney's decision to release Snow White in China this June underscores that desperation. They're clearly hoping for a miracle to soften the financial blow. But the Chinese box office has become selective about Western films, and it's hard to imagine Snow White, a distinctly Western fairy tale, resonating in a way that saves the project. This situation reflects a broader industry problem: Hollywood's obsession with manufacturing stars instead of letting them develop naturally. Had Zegler been given time to build her portfolio through supporting roles in smaller projects, her career might look very different today. Instead, she became the face of enormous flops before she had the chance to truly prove herself. That approach is risky not just for studios, but also for the actors themselves. When someone is pushed into the spotlight too quickly and tied to expensive failures, it creates a perception about their bankability that can be hard to undo. Fair or not, audiences often associate actors with a movie's failure, even when the fault lies elsewhere. And that, more than anything, shows how Rachel Zegler's situation mirrors a larger shift in the entertainment industry. The rush to manufacture instant stars rather than letting talent and audience connection dictate who rises. The days when a movie star's name alone could launch a film into box office glory are largely behind us. In the modern entertainment landscape, audiences no longer rush to theaters simply because a familiar face appears on the poster. Instead, they are drawn to recognizable franchises, compelling storylines, or thematic resonance. This evolution makes it increasingly difficult for up-and-coming actors to establish themselves. For studios, the safest route is to rely on bankable names. Yet paradoxically, becoming bankable has never been more challenging. In the past, stars were built gradually. Careers took shape through a carefully measured balance of different kinds of projects. Actors would alternate between independent films that showcased their craft, commercial blockbusters that kept them in the public eye, and prestige projects that earned critical respect. This diversified approach allowed performers to demonstrate range, connect with multiple demographics, and build loyalty among audiences over time. When we look at the modern careers of actors like Florence Pugh, Timothée Chalamet, and Zendaya, this pattern holds true. Each of them took a step-by-step route, blending smaller, critically adored works with well-timed mainstream ventures. Their audiences grew organically because they weren't overexposed too soon, and each project strengthened their reputation rather than testing it. Rachel Zegler, by contrast, was launched into the deep end of the industry without that foundation. She was handed colossal, high-stakes projects before she had the chance to build a genuine following. Rather than being introduced gradually through mid-scale films or ensemble roles, she became the public face of billion-dollar gambles from the outset. The results speak for themselves: a series of financially underperforming films and a stage production that failed to generate audience interest. None of this necessarily reflects on her raw ability. Zegler clearly has talent, and she is technically proficient as an actress. But the machinery of Hollywood failed her by positioning her as a star before audiences were ready to embrace her in that role. The larger issue here is that Hollywood's star-making strategy has collapsed under its own weight. Studios cannot manufacture audience loyalty with marketing campaigns alone. True star power requires consistency, project after project that delivers either emotional connection, cultural relevance, or sheer entertainment value. When studios bypass that process and attempt to crown someone a star overnight, they often set that performer up for failure. For Zegler, the smarter course of action would now be to pivot towards smaller, well-written films that allow her to rebuild credibility. Supporting roles in strong ensemble casts or standout performances in independent dramas could demonstrate her craft without burdening her with the pressure of carrying an entire project. Over time, those choices could reframe her reputation, from being perceived as a risky box office liability to an actor capable of compelling, memorable work. A few critically acclaimed roles could re-establish trust with audiences far more effectively than another tentpole misfire. But whether Hollywood will permit such a recalibration is another question. The industry is notoriously reluctant to acknowledge when its star-making apparatus has failed. Executives rarely admit that their casting gambles were misguided, because doing so would mean exposing their own poor judgment. Instead, they often double down, hoping that persistence will eventually force the narrative they want into existence. In Zegler's case, this is already evident. Despite multiple warning signs, the industry continues to hand her high-profile opportunities, seemingly unwilling to step back and reconsider. Over time, however, financial realities have a way of asserting themselves. Studios can only ignore repeated losses for so long before shareholders and investors demand accountability. The likeliest outcome is not a dramatic blacklisting of Zegler, but a subtle retreat. Fewer leading roles in massive productions, replaced by supporting or secondary parts that reduce risk. This quiet adjustment would allow Hollywood to save face while minimizing further financial damage. Ultimately, the Snow White saga reveals more about the industry than it does about Zegler herself. It highlights Hollywood's growing detachment from audience sentiment, its reliance on echo chambers, and its obsession with engineering stars rather than cultivating them. When decision-makers lose touch with what viewers genuinely want, they create situations where enormous sums of money are wasted and promising actors are set up for failure. The lesson here is clear: star power cannot be forced. It must be earned gradually, through choices that resonate with audiences and performances that inspire loyalty. Hollywood's refusal to recognize this reality not only undermines its own financial stability, but also risks damaging the careers of the very people it claims to champion. Rachel Zegler may well recover if she takes a more deliberate path, but her story stands as a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition, marketing, and misplaced confidence collide with the stubborn reality of audience indifference.